I think we're good to go. So, hello everyone. Welcome to what's set to be another insightful and educational webinar from the Institute of Financial Operations and Leadership, where our panel of experts will be sharing some real-world experiences of automating accounts payable and accounts payable processes, and providing you with our guide to automation for leaders of accounts payable. Please do put any questions that you have into the chat, and we'll pick them up as we go along. It's an informal session. We'll be running a couple of polls as we go through as well, just to get some feedback from the audience. So please do take a moment to take part in those as well. For those that haven't met before, my name is Sam Hitchenray, and I'm joined today by a panel of experts, all with a wealth of knowledge and experience in the field of either accounts payable, automation, or both. And our first panelist that I'm going to introduce is Gary Stevens. So Gary's been involved in finance in private and public sector for over 40 years. He served for 25 years with Aberdeen City Council as Financial Services Manager, and one of his responsibilities was for accounts payable. He led a transformation project which delivered efficiencies and improvements in performance, and in 3 years he delivered a best-in-class and award-winning accounts payable team. So Gary's also part of the accounts payable and procure to pay training team here at IFOL, and he delivers regular masterclasses and training sessions for our students and members as well. So hi, Gary.
Hi.
Second on the panel, we've got Rod Chadwick. Rod is the latest member of the IFOL Education team, and he has joined the team to educate and share his wealth of knowledge and experience, very particularly in the area of automation. Rod is by trade a qualified accountant and has formerly held a position as the robotic process automation intake lead at the Royal Mail, and was instrumental in their automation strategy, which delivered a return on investment which ran into the millions of pounds. And then thirdly on our panel, we have Rob Israck, who is the Global Chief Marketing Officer from AP automation technology provider Tipalti. Rob's been at Tipalti for over 7 years and recently moved to the UK as the General Manager for Europe to build Tipalti's presence in Europe. He's also Global Chief Marketing Officer, and prior to Tipalti, Rob ran global marketing programs for NetSuite as well, who I'm sure many of you have heard of. So just before we get started, Rob, if you could just tell us a little bit about Tipalti so we can learn about what you do there.
Sure, Sam. Thanks for having me. So for those who aren't familiar, Tipalti is in the payables automation space. Essentially, we seek to automate the end-to-end payables process for companies. Usually we focus on high velocity, fast growth companies. So that's kind of our sweet spot, so to speak, and just kind of longevity of the company. We've been around 10 to 11 years at this point, have about 700 employees around the world, and have about 30 folks in the UK right now. So we launched in September and got our FCA license as well. So that's been my focus in the past few months. So been an exciting journey so far.
Fantastic, a busy few months, I'm sure. And so I'll be looking forward to hearing a bit from you, Rob, on automation as we go through. So just a starting point for today's session, we're going to run the first poll of the day, just to get a bit of a pulse check on the audience and find out where you are in terms of your automation journey. So if you could just take a moment to take part in that. This question actually ties in with a question that we're running in our annual automation trends survey, which everyone will get the link to at the end of this webinar as well. So we'll be able to do a bit of a comparison on some stats from that survey as well. Just while we're waiting for the results to come in on that poll, I'm first of all going to turn to you, Rod, and just for a starting point, can you maybe give us an idea or an understanding of what actually is automation, what's meant by automation? Because we see it everywhere, we hear about it, but what does it really mean?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's one that does cause a lot of confusion, because there's a bewildering array of different descriptions of automation across the piece, and it can mean very different things to different companies. And really, it all depends on where you are in your journey and where you're trying to get to. So for some people, automation can be as simple as macros in Excel, through to a fully integrated, automated end-to-end system that incorporates things like machine learning. So I think the main thing to think about with this is that any sort of automation no matter what flavor it is or what complexity, is really just replicating or doing something that people will do as part of that process. And it will do it to different degrees of complexity and sophistication. But I think the terminology is something that can really sort of put people off. So whether you're talking about robotic process automation, RPA, which is the building of robots to do tasks that people do, whether it's machine learning and intelligent automation, which is really very similar, but the difference with that is that it learns from each time it does something. It will pick information up and improve the process by itself as part of that process. Or whether it's something like a specific piece of software to look at AP, for example, end to end, like Tipalti that Rob will talk about later. Where that's very specifically looking at those processes, whereas the others are perhaps more sort of free form, and get them to do what you want. I suppose the best analogy is something like sets of Lego. When you're buying Lego for your kids, you buy a kit and it's building the Star Wars Death Star. It's very specific and it will do exactly what it says in the box, and you know exactly what you're going to get. Whereas something like RPA is probably more akin to just buying the box of bits. You buy a big box, it's all random, and you build what you want with it, and it's very specific and focused on what you want it to be, rather than something that you're just plugging in out of the box, as it were. So I think for me that the key message is to think, well, all you're doing is going to be replicating what a person does, but doing it more efficiently, quicker, right first time, better controls. But it's the things it's doing are no more complex than that, and it's really just getting it right for what's right for your organization.
So in terms of when we talk about different types of automation like machine learning, AI, IA, is there one that people should be looking towards, or what are the differences?
I think my own view is that they're all kind of flavors of a very similar thing. And actually the terminology is kind of what puts people off, and it's almost like, what's the latest buzzword from whichever company's providing that piece of software. I mean, really, I think a catch-all term is probably intelligent automation for those things, where it's automating it, but it's doing it in a bit more of a sophisticated way. So an example is, you might have a piece of software that can read an invoice. OCR type technology. It will read an invoice and it will pick all the relevant bits of data up and populate your system for you with that data, rather than keying it manually. Intelligent automation will look at those things, and the next, when it can't find a piece of data, you show it where it is. Next time it gets an invoice from that person, it knows. Right? You've not got to reprogram it; it finds it, it does it for you. And that's that. I suppose as a real example is the sort of application of something like intelligent automation. And these things are getting much more sophisticated and much more available within software packages now. So I think that's, but I say that the terminology, machine learning, intelligent automation, artificial intelligence, they're all really flavors of around the same sort of functionality.
Yeah, and obviously automation is delivering benefits to lots of different organisations. From your point of view, Rob, what do those benefits maybe look like for your customers?
Yeah, sure. And Rod, I think, alluded to many of them. I think the biggest piece is freeing, in the context of finance, right? Is freeing finance up to focus on those areas that the business needs. Oftentimes a business has demands to grow, to grow in a sustainable way, to focus finance on more strategic initiatives, things like, navigating a company through challenges such as COVID, or fundraising, financial planning for the following year, CAC analysis, improving business visibility, and the list goes on. There's plenty of projects, but freeing finance to focus on those functions. In the AP context, usually when you poll controllers or FDs on what the most time consuming function in finance, very, very consistently comes up as accounts payable, being that. There was a study done by Institute of Financial Management that came out number one. It wasn't number one by a few decimal points. It was a fairly long shot. I think number two is payment reconciliation, which, by the way, is closely connected to accounts payable. So it's largely that, and the other two pieces are controls and visibility. That if you get it right and you do it right, you also should be able to strengthen your financial and fraud controls in the business, as well as improve business visibility, things like accelerating the financial close process and the such, spend visibility, cash flow visibility, etc.
And just kind of bringing you into the conversation, Gary, from your point of view, as an accounts payable manager, a practitioner, what kind of benefits did you see from automation in your organisation?
Yeah, well, if I go back to 2007, when really I started to look at our transformation project within our local authority, we had to get some foundations in place first before we could even start looking at automation, and that was around things like centralizing our AP function. So we got a centralized team, and then bringing in a workflow solution, which I find was really, really important, so that we could have a central location for invoices to come in. And importantly, we knew where everything was at that point, because we could then use the workflow to get those invoices around the organization. So that took a little bit of time to get those two foundations in place. But once we got that in, we were then able to start looking at the benefits that automation could bring in for us. And back then, OCR was the main sort of automated process that was available, and we worked with our ERP provider to bring in OCR, but it still involved a fair bit of manual work. I mean, we were getting invoices still in paper. We were still having to scan the invoices in. We were still having to rely on setting up the suppliers and take that data off when they came in. So it was still quite cumbersome and quite time consuming. And I wanted to get to where we could get invoices in and they could go through without as little human intervention as possible. So e-invoicing was the next step for us, and that was the sort of panacea, if you like, of where we wanted to get to. So again, we worked with our provider to bring in an e-invoicing solution. We also, because we were public sector, we had to go out to tender, but there's a number of things that we were looking at in terms of using our existing provider, because they'd already integrated with our main financial system in other organizations. We felt the risk was a lot lower to us, and we could hopefully get it up and running quicker. They knew how it worked. So that was one of the key drivers for me as well, was to get that automation in as quickly as possible and work with the provider to look at around about 100, 120 top suppliers, who most are already set up for e-invoicing, and work with them to start bringing in the invoices electronically into the organization, and then start delivering some return on investment. So you were getting savings in time. You were being able to take some of the staff off some of the key-in jobs and give them more valued tasks within the team. You could also deliver savings around headcount. I mean, I was able to give up some vacant posts because we didn't need them moving forward. So the organization was seeing some savings behind that as well. So there was lots of benefits to bringing in automation for me.
Yeah, so it sounds like there was some good return on investments there. And I think, we probably all agree that there are lots of benefits then from automating certain processes. But where, now moving on to our kind of second discussion point, where should an accounts payable manager begin when they're, in a non-automated, say they're in the position of no automation or very little automation? What might be a good starting point? And I'll go back to you, Gary, with that one.
Yeah, well, I just touch again on what I mentioned at the start, is really look at what your setup is across the organization. Having a centralized team, very, very important. I mean, we had something like over 1,200 requisitioners across our local authority ordering goods and services. So you've got to get them on board, because we introduced a workflow system, for example. That was a completely different way of working. People like to hold on to little bits of paper. We had to get them used to looking at images on a screen, and that's a big change. And you do get some resistance to that. Plus, when you're centralizing your accounts payable function, departments can see that as a threat. They could lose jobs or whatever, but we tried to give the message that taking away that invoice processing allowed those staff to be freed up to other areas within the departments, so there was benefits in that way. So I think it's really getting your functions in place, your foundations are there, which will then allow you to look at how the automation can then bring further improvements on top of that.
And so same sort of thing to you, Rod, from your perspective as the expert in the automation and I suppose the implementation of the project. Where would be a good place for the manager to start?
Yeah, I think it really echoes what Gary touched on. So the program that I ran in Royal Mail was called the Process Simplification and Automation Program, and that was very deliberate that it had simplification as part of that title. And so the first start point is absolutely process review. So absolutely look at what your processes are doing first before you even think about doing any sort of automation. And we very much did it with a lean toolkit, a lean mindset, using some of those tools in terms of like value mapping, value analysis, to go through the process and understand where the weak points were. Because essentially what you should be looking to do first of all is eliminate any unnecessary steps first. That's your first thing. Simplify what you've got, standardize what you've got. Like Gary said, if you have a centralized model, get that in place first, and then you can then you start to think about automating. Because if your processes are sort of dysfunctional to begin with, automating them won't make them any better. You know, you'll just be doing the same rubbish quicker, and that's essentially, you know, where you'll be, which is exactly the place you don't want to be. But I think also touching on that is that you need to have, before you start any automation journey, you have to have a very, very clear vision and expectation of what success looks like for your company. So what is it that you're trying to achieve? So if you're putting some investment into this and there's an expectation of return on investment, what is that return? So again, it touches on some of the things that Gary talked about around, are you talking about doing it with fewer people? Are you talking about actually creating capacity within the organization to do something better? And by the way, in my experience, that gives you a much better return in the long run than actually taking heads out. You know, you can do that, but it doesn't always save you a great deal of money. You know, are you looking at tightening controls? Are some of your things audit issues, audit risk issues and compliance issues that you've got to resolve, which automation is fantastic at resolving because it gets it right first time. So have a very specific view of what success looks like, because if you don't right at the outset, then you'll always be kind of chasing your tail as to what it is that you're trying to achieve. And yeah, the business case, once you understand what it is that you're trying to do and trying to measure and make sure you can measure it, then you've got a great chance of actually, you know, getting a big success out of your automation program.
So in summary then, maybe doing a review, having a clear plan of action, some set objectives, and almost a roadmap really for your automation project.
Business analyst skills are crucial at the start of any of those programs. So to really properly understand the processes, review them thoroughly, and then see which direction you want to take.
And to you, Rob, with your organisation, if you're going into a new customer who don't have any automation, what are the kind of first steps that your organisation would take or would advise even?
Yeah, it's pretty aligned actually with what Gary and Rod had said. It's, understanding what the current state is, what are the processes. We tend to look at the end-to-end process. So we'll look at everything from, Gary actually mentioned supplier setup and, registration all the way to the VAT processes. Of course, the invoice collection, but also invoice approvals, your payment processes. I think the other piece that often gets missed is, you shouldn't only look at your process today, but anticipate what your process may look like or your business needs may look like in 2 to 3 years from now, or maybe longer. Obviously, the longer it gets, the more difficult it gets, but you shouldn't be able to anticipate what supplier counts, how they may change, invoice counts may change, payment volumes, potentially geographic distribution of those payment volumes, because that certainly comes into play, things like subsidiaries or acquisitions. And on the control side, for sure, as a company gets bigger, the audit preparedness and requirements tend to get more rigorous, and so you should prepare for that proactively, so that you don't have to keep modifying your processes and the technology with it over time. That you should have a relatively sustainable infrastructure you put in place.
And I mean, they're all really good points. I mean, from your position, Rod, what would be maybe a good way that the AP manager could assess what solution might be because there are various providers out there of different types of solutions that all offer similar, maybe some different things, more or less to each other. So how could the AP manager kind of narrow down what solution they maybe should go with?
It's hard to give a specific answer to that because it will differ very much by each individual company's circumstances. But I think it comes back to understanding what that success is. What is it that you're trying to achieve? So are you trying to, which part of the process are you trying to, improve and make more efficient? And really touching on what Rob said, it's the end-to-end. You need to look at the end-to-end, the whole procure-to-pay cycle of what's in there, and understand where your weak points are and where you're going to get the biggest benefit for your investment. Because depending on where your weaknesses and where your main areas, that's where you're going to focus what solution you need. So for example, if your actual customer setup process, for example, is the actual sort of the bottleneck where of stopping it, slows it down. If you've done a good process analysis, you'll know where your bottlenecks are, and that's where you'd put your first piece of automation in to tackle that. Get your big win first, and depending on what that requirement is, it might be like a robotic solution. It might be a workflow-based solution. It might be an OCR-based solution, and something more like sort of Tipalti and what Rob's company provides. So I think it all comes down to that process analysis in the first place to understand where your requirement is, and that will determine kind of what sort of automation solution you need. So it's almost like I think get the business requirement first and then decide upon the solution. Don't start with the solution because that's the tail wagging the dog, and you'll end up with a dysfunctional outcome.
Yeah, and for you, Gary, you mentioned that you had to go out to tender at the council. Did that process work well for you? Was that a good way of narrowing down which organisation was going to work best for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think being one of the advantages we had was that there's various frameworks set up now within tenders, so you've got a lot of suppliers on there, so we could actually pick which ones we felt were going to be the most suitable to what we needed, and I was able to just narrow that down to 3, so that made the exercise a lot quicker for me to be able to look at. But as I said earlier, we decided to go with our main ERP provider who could bring in automation for us. We just felt that the risks were a lot less in terms of timescales, the fact that it's already proven to work on their system. So we were able to go and view it working in other organizations, which was a real positive for me. I was able to see it actually in operation, and that's something that you really need to try and do before you go live with anybody who's going to have a look at it working, or at least speak to somebody that's using it and get some feedback from them. That's really important. So we were able to make a reasonably quick decision from when we decided that we wanted to bring in automation to actually engaging our preferred bidder to go ahead with the work.
Yeah, so definitely kind of engaging with other peers and individuals in the same position as yourself, who may have been through the process or maybe going through it at the moment. That's a good way to kind of see how it all works in action, I suppose. Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of summarising, where to begin, then I think by the sounds of it, a process review, identifying your key objectives and your outcomes, and looking ahead, maybe as you said, Rob, 2 to 3 years is a great way to get started. And touching on what you said, Rod, engaging a business analyst perhaps to help you with doing that process review and identifying the gaps and where you want to or what you want to automate, really. So out of that process, this is kind of an open question to all. Does anyone have any maybe less obvious processes that are identified during that review of processes that AP could automate? Any ideas?
I could talk about some of the things that we did within Royal Mail when we were looking at AP, and again, some of it, the obvious things are around the automation of invoices and OCR and actually sort of reducing the manual input. But from end to end, when you start to bring in the procurement side of it, it's things like vendor management, master data management. One thing that we found was that when we sort of looked at it, we had a very large number of vendors that hadn't been used for quite some time, and so you have this big tail of vendors, which the danger of doing that means that when people are raising their requisition, they're not necessarily going to be going to the ones that are most current, or the suppliers that are giving you the best value, that you've got central contracts with, and so on. So you need to try and keep on top of that master data, and having that in a current format. And that's where automation can help. And what we did within Royal Mail was to build a robot that would actually go through, run through all the suppliers, identify which ones hadn't been used. You put some parameters in, so any that hadn't been used in the last 12 months, identify them, get a list, and then where required, then sort of close them down, or at least disable them so they're not part of the procurement end-to-end routine. And that made a big difference, in terms of making sure that people are using the right suppliers, that they're getting the best benefit out of central contracts, and economies of scale around discounts and so forth, rather than going to ones that haven't been used for ages, but they might just see it by accident and then just pick that particular one. So things like that, it's the stuff that it's really important to keep looking at the end-to-end process, and not just a piece that you perhaps look at on a daily basis.
Yeah, just while you were giving us that point, Rod, there's been a quick question coming in. So this is kind of open to everyone. It's do you have any particular experience with Oracle, and which process can you think a company can get the most success on Oracle? So I think maybe someone looking at obviously using the Oracle ERP system, are there any particular processes that they could automate that would work really well for them?
We've got a few clients such as Twitter who use Oracle, and so we know from that experience that they're not very advanced on the accounts payable side of things, particularly as it attaches to payments workflows. So I'll put that out there and respond to that question.
Not an Oracle user, unfortunately. So, but I would say that, you should be looking at the key areas around your invoice matching is the key one. Your three-way match, automating that process. That's where you will get a lot of quick wins, reduce a lot of the workload.
Yeah, so I suppose once you boil down to it, the processing is, regardless of what system you're using, are probably going to be fairly similar.
Will be, yeah.
Yeah, I can rattle off a few other processes that I 100% agree with, both the PO matching, and you should prepare for both two-way and three-way, as well as the supplier vendor master record piece. If you get that vendor master record wrong, in addition to all the benefits that Rod talked about, you also tend to have a higher payment error rate later on, because it's that route that leads to the data you use to actually make payment errors. And of course that comes with supplier friction, time delays, and also bank penalty fees, which we all love. Other process to think of, a lot of people talk about OCR a lot. A lot of people forget about invoice approval workflows. If you OCR and you still have a manual or kind of disorganized invoice approval workflow, you're not going to get a lot of savings ultimately from even automating the invoice process. PO management, which comes part and parcel with PO matching. Payments, particularly if you have a lot of cross-border payments or high volumes of payments, or even multi-subsidiary architecture, that means you're paying from different geographies, should absolutely be looked at as part of your end-to-end AP process. If you fix one part of the process and it doesn't connect to another, you're going to minimize your payback. Supplier communication. So it's good to have the vendor master record up front, but there's also touch points around payment status communications with suppliers. It's typically not what finance or buyers want to be spending their time communicating, and the suppliers don't either. And so that supplier payment status communication, supplier portal, supplier email communications is important. And definitely financial close is often looked at as a disconnected process from AP. And if you break it down, payment reconciliation is probably the most time delaying part of the payment of the financial close process. So it should be a consideration along the way.
Excellent. So I think, we've had a good look there then at where we can get started with automation, and also, maybe uncovering some of the hidden processes or things that you wouldn't immediately think about when it comes to automating. What we're going to look at now is maybe what some of the key challenges might be. So we've got, a panel here who are experienced in automation projects, and they'll have come across challenges, I'm sure. So just to get started with that, I'm just going to set up our second poll of the day, and that poll is going to be all around different challenges that you may have faced in automation. So just while we're getting that, just while I'm trying to find that poll and get that started, Rod, if I turn to you for a second, what might be some of the key challenges that our audience should be aware of when they're going to start their automation journey?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I suppose the obvious one is, have you got funding, to do? So you've identified where your weaknesses are. You've identified, what you want to do, what your you might have identified the software that you want to use and your partners that you want to help you. Do you have the business case and the funding in, and do you have the backing from the relevant senior stakeholders in the business, first and foremost? Assuming that you've got that in place, then the biggest challenges actually sort of getting in my experience, are predominantly around communication. So, have you got a communication strategy in place to make sure that all the relevant stakeholders are being kept involved and up to date at the right time? So I would say, before you undertake anything like this, is the project management and the change management skills that you require to make something like this done successfully. Make sure that you've got those at the outset within your company, and if you haven't, then you may need to think about bringing people in, either on a temporary or permanent basis, to give you those skills. Because I've seen examples where people plow ahead, don't really have those skills in place, and if that structure is not there from the beginning, you will always struggle, and you will always be sort of reacting to things rather than actually sort of planning them in. So, I mean, in just looking at the results there that have come back for that people have, team resisting change. So you getting budget, we talked about the team resisting change, and I think for me, the team resisting change, that's where the comms is so important. So, as I mentioned earlier, about having that vision of what success looks like and what it means, being able to communicate that in a way that will bring the people in your team with you, as opposed to sort of being actively against it, is the crucial bit. And it's not to be underestimated. The power of storytelling and the power of actually having the right message in the right language will overcome an awful lot of those issues. So, touching on something that Gary said earlier, when the first thing people automatically think of when you do automation is, oh, that's my job at risk, or there's things that our team's going to be shrunk. If that's not what you're trying to achieve, and hopefully for most people it's not, because there's bigger benefits to be had, make sure those messages are out there. Make sure that's front and center right from the outset, that people know what you're trying to achieve, and that a lot of this can be job enrichment for people, actually. That rather than sort of sat at the desk all day just sort of typing in blindly, keying stuff in, they can actually get involved in something significantly more interesting and significantly more value added. And if you've got that message out there from the beginning, that's the crucial bit. Another thing I've found is, one lesson I've learned is that, there's nothing worse than a vacuum where communication is concerned. If there's no information, people will fill it with what they think is going to happen, and then they're very difficult then to draw back from and get back on track. So that would be my advice: get those things in place before you start.
So definitely keeping the or lowering resistance to change and keeping the team engaged through communication is a key one there, Rod. From your side, Gary, in the real, during your transformation projects, what kind of challenges did you experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll echo what Rod has said, and communication was extremely important in terms of us moving through our transformation project from centralizing our team right through to bringing in automation. One of the key things for me was that, I mean, I had to put a report into council so that we could get the backing financially, but also importantly, get the buy-in from all the directors on each of the services that we were going to be delivering this to. Once I got their buy-in, that was a huge tick box for me, because I knew we'd got that support moving forward, because there was going to be resistance from heads of services within those directorates. So the communication aspect was really, really important. So I myself went out and spoke to groups of people within all of those departments to tell them exactly what we were planning to do, how it would affect them, what the benefits are down the line, not only to their department, but to the council as a whole. And I kept those messages going out regularly. So we had regular briefings with all of the staff across the organisation to make sure they were aware of what we were doing. And importantly, the staff that I was bringing into the team were the ones who were really needing to be motivated as to what we were doing was going to be it's going to be a good journey, not a bad journey. Yes, we're going to have a few bumps in the road, which we did, but thankfully I got together a team that was really gelled very, very quickly, and they could see where we wanted to go, and they bought into that. And we had some moments when we were moving to automation and we had piles and piles of invoices in the office. Suppliers weren't getting paid quickly and it was scary, but we just had to grit our teeth and work through it. And we got out the back end, and we became a best-in-class team, and we eventually won a couple of awards, which was fantastic to be able to do that from about 3 or 4 years down the line when we were a very poor performing organisation. So I say I can't put enough emphasis on communication and the importance of that in the organisation. Definitely.
So having a good, strong comms plan within the team and maybe with the broader organisation is a great place.
Absolutely, yeah.
One of the other challenges that looks like for your audience have highlighted is the budget side, getting budget from the business to run this project. Rob, what do you presumably you help your customers with that side, or do they come to you when they've got the budget?
Sure. Yeah, we do at times when needed. So it's mixed. We do serve a lot of fast-growing companies, so oftentimes our mid-market have a little less of a sophisticated budget process from that perspective, and so it tends to be a little bit more need-based on their planning for the future and looking at what are the right processes to scale with that. So it comes down to things like reduction of workload, because there's other work that has to be done as the business grows that they can redeploy their resources and folks to focus on. As you keep growing, you will have to hire more people in both finance and other functions, but they can work on those projects that are mission critical for the business. There is often a payback from an ROI perspective and payment error reduction rates. Certainly from accounts payable, as you go forward, you won't have to hire as many accounts payable as otherwise, and some other savings around FX conversion and potentially moving people from different payment methods to payment methods. A lot of cross-border payments, for example, are done with wire transfers these days. That's generally unnecessary, and you can save some money from that perspective. So those are the different types of ROI calculations that we work with clients on to help build a business case. And of course, things that there's softer elements, of course, like supplier relationships, visibility, accelerated financial close, and enhanced controls, which that is pretty difficult to put in a spreadsheet from an ROI perspective, but the business generally gets that those things are pretty important as you keep growing.
So just while we've been chatting that through, there's been a couple of questions come in as well. So just firstly, I suppose this is open to everyone. Has anyone managed to make accounts payable a profit center rather than a cost center when you take into account early payment discounts and headcount reduction? Has anyone achieved that?
Well, being public sector, we weren't really profit making, but we always had we had to deliver savings, or we had reduced budgets moving forward. But one of the things I did want to do, and I managed to get that into our AP team, was we went with early payment discounts for suppliers, because we were seeing such a big improvement in our processing and our performance, and we were paying, you know, something like 98% plus of invoices within our statutory 30 days. We could see that suppliers, there's an opportunity there for us to move that from 30 days down to 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 and get the discount back from the supplier. So we started to work on that, and started to sign up quite a few companies to get the benefit of early payment discount. Obviously, as I mentioned right at the start, headcount reduction. As we move forward with automation, I may have been carrying a couple of vacancies, for example, within my team. I realized that I didn't need to fill those posts, so that was a saving that I was able to deliver into my budget and ultimately into my directorate overall. So yeah, there was benefits there. Yeah, hopefully that's answered the question from my point of view.
I mean, in terms of making it a profit center, it's not something that I've done in the past, making AP a profit center. You know, with the automation, it still remained a cost center. The benefits that were being delivered were being measured as part of the program, you know, as part of what was actually being delivered, and as long as you could measure, that was fine. I mean, you could do that. I suppose my only sort of word of caution would be that if you're not careful with some of those things, you end up creating a cottage industry of measure, you know, of how you measure internal activity. And yeah, as far as possible, you're trying to kind of want to keep that as simple as you can. So it's not something personally I've gone down that route. I think there are probably easier and better ways of tracking the benefits that you're actually delivering as part of the program, having AP as a profit center.
Yeah. So perhaps maybe things that are better to focus on rather than reducing headcount.
Just touching on that, Sam, I think one thing you need to sort of think about with benefits is, you know, you need to be creative. Think a little bit wider, I think, when you're doing automation programs about benefits, because there is a danger that all anyone looks at when you're looking at benefits, particularly on something like AP, is that it's cost. It's all about cost. It's all about bottom line. It's all about, you know, have you actually sort of reduced the size of your team? Actually, that's a pretty short-sighted way of looking at it, and you need to look at the entire sort of end-to-end value chain about where you're adding value in, and think about how you can then, you know, monetize that, and or at least put a value on it. I mean, one thing we did a lot in Royal Mail, it wasn't particularly with AP, but in other parts of the business, was there was a number of areas where there was significant difficulties actually sort of delivering the core business because people were too you know, laden down with admin. And so by taking a lot of that admin away by automating, you create a capacity within the team, and you can measure the creation of capacity, and you can put a value on it. So whilst it doesn't necessarily go straight to the bottom line in the first instance, it still has a value, and it's still something that then will give you, you know, a knock-on impact further down the line. It's not an exact science, but I think that's part of your business case discussion, and it's part of that understanding what success looks like right from the start, and that, you know, what was, you know, so if you've got all those problems that people can't deliver that actual core business, and you're going to have to need, you know, if things carry, you're going to need another 20 people to do that. Well, actually taking that stuff away and avoiding those costs is as legitimate a saving as if you were taking it from the existing cost base. So you need to think, you know, around this and really think hard about what benefits realization actually looks like for your automation program, and do that right up front and have that as part of your business case so that everyone's on the same page.
If I can just jump in as well, one of the things we found the benefits of automation was we were paying our suppliers better and quicker, which meant that we had a lot of local suppliers, many who were SMEs, so they were getting a benefit of getting paid quickly. That money was going back into the local economy quicker, and a lot of those SMEs were using other local companies, so that money was filtering down. So our councillors loved that message, that we were looking after local businesses and paying them quickly. So that was a benefit to us, and giving us a higher profile in terms of how we pay our suppliers, and getting some good publicity on the back of it. So,
and nowadays you have the pay on time regulations that are coming down, and so for businesses that might not have the public benefit, they actually need to start taking this seriously regardless.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one other question that's come in, I'll point this to you, Rob. Is OCR still a good form of automation for invoice processing, or has technology moved on to something else?
It's a good form as part of a solution. As a standalone, it's very limited, and it's not going to ultimately get you where you want to go. So a good AP automation solution may include OCR, probably should include OCR as part of its technology. It also should include things like machine learning that Rod mentioned earlier. Things like example there is approve workflow, right? If a invoice comes in and it's routed to a approver, and that approver says, actually, that's not me, this supplier should be worked by this, the system should learn that, and next time around, that should route to the other person. And so it should have AI built in, workflow automation built in, things like payment approve workflows, invoice approve workflows. Those two processes should be separate. You're not supposed to have the same people approving invoices as payments from a fraud perspective. And so it should look at it's a part of a solution. As a standalone solution, honestly, it's not really a very productive solution.
When it's embedded within a wider solution, though, I guess it's still quite important to look at how good is the OCR technology that overall solution is using, because presumably if it's not that good, it can cause issues further down the line.
For sure, and nowadays when you look at that, you should look at what you're going for. Ideally, is what Gary mentioned earlier, is a touchless invoice process, and so which doesn't include just collection invoices, but the processes before and after as well. But so there's solutions out there that will also apply managed services, so that if, let's say, 30% of those invoices don't come in with every single field perfect, they can apply both AI as well as managed services element to get you as far along to touchless as possible without using your own team's resources for that.
Excellent.
I mean, certainly my experience there, Sam, OCR work, the OCR part of technology works very, very well on electronic invoices. It's still not so great when it's paper. It's and it degrades if you've got handwriting involved. It's stressful again. So the more electronic, the better. But even with the paper stuff, there are solutions whereby it can read what it will read, and then rather than someone starting from scratch keying it in, it will populate what it can, and then the person can just put the other bits in and have an image of both up in front of them on the screen and then correct. So there are ways and means of using it as a partial solution, even if your company doesn't support a fully automated one.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else to add? I'm just bearing in mind that we're kind of reaching the end of our session today.
The one thing I might add to all the comments on change management, on making sure communications out there and project management is out there, is, in addition, when you do select the technology that's right for you, consider that in the process. So consider easy use for the suppliers, for the buyers, for the approvers, for the staff themselves to get the data. So make sure whatever technology you have doesn't just have the various checkbox and bells and whistles, but it's easy to consume, easy to use. That'll definitely reduce friction in the implementation and the success of the project.
Okay, I think that's a great way of wrapping it up, to be honest. So to close things off, I just want to say thank you to our panel, Rod, Rob, and Gary for taking part with some great insights there. Hopefully you in the audience have found that very useful. The next part to this webinar, I suppose, mini series will be where we're going to look at scaling up. So as most of you indicated from the poll, you're already on the automation journey. So let's look at how you can scale up and what you need to bear in mind when it comes to that. So we'll be looking to do that webinar at some point during early 2022. So we'll be sending out some invitations to that very soon. At the end of the webinar, you'll all get a link to take part in our current AP automation trends survey, which will be closing off at the end of this week. Please do take part in that, and in return, you'll get a free copy of the analysed results, which we'll be comparing to previous years as well. So from myself and on behalf of the panel, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.